Welcome to the county seat today. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We are continuing our series of talking about the finalists in the senatorial race for the United States Senate. First change in nearly 3 decades. And it's our privilege to be joined, actually 4 decades. I had that wrong.
It's been a long time. Yeah.
It's our privilege to have with us Dr. Mike Kennedy joining us today, who is running on the Republican ticket. Dr. Kennedy, give us a little background. I understand that's not the only set of letters that you've achieved behind your name.
It's not. The most important one is DAD, Dad, so I'm privileged to be a father as well. But so thanks for having me on, Chad. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your viewers. And I'm Mike Kennedy. I'm running for United States Senate on the Republican ticket. I'm a family doctor. I've been doing that for 20 years, and I love doing that. We work with people to try to help them resolve their issues and help us move forward in a positive direction on the healthcare side of things. I'm also an attorney, graduate of BYU Law School, so I'm privileged to know something about the law. And I've had the past 6 years the privilege of serving the people of Utah as a state legislator too. And that's been really a great opportunity for me to learn a lot about this state and a deep dive into the variety of issues that we confront in this state. There are many different things that my rural as well as urban and suburban colleagues have helped me, and I've helped them to work through as to the multiple issues that we confront in this state. And so as a doctor, as an attorney, as a state legislator, and most especially as a husband and a father of 8 children, I think at 49 years old, I bring a unique set of skills and opportunities to the people of Utah for this U.S. Senate seat that I'm offering my services for.
Great. Well, let's dive into a few of the issues. These are basically topics that have been raised by county officials that they wanted to make sure that we got on the record. So we'll start with the first one. Opioids, big problem nationally. You've got Utah counties suing the manufacturers. You've got strains on health services across the state. What's the federal role?
That's a great question, and sadly, if we look at the federal role, I believe the federal government was part of the start of this process. If you go back to the mid to late 90s, that's when the opioid crisis seemed to start and peak over time. It's now on the decline. We're making strides in the right direction, but I don't know if you and your viewers would recall there was a movement in the medical community to have pain as the 5th vital sign, and there was a press on doctors and hospitals to make sure that they were using plenty of these pain control medicines that often include opioids to make sure that we treat with sympathy and empathy the patients that we take care of. So I was trained in medical school from 1994 to 1998, did my residency training from 98 to 2001. And during that time, it was a serious press on new doctors, training doctors, as well as new residents that were in the training process too, to make sure we give out lots of pain medicines. And that, in fact, came from the government organization JACO, which is a supervisory organization. So your question's an important one. Your viewers need to understand that on some level, to have the federal government fix something that it started on some level is almost a problem, because they're the ones that were complicit in the creation of this problem by using pain as a 5th vital sign. I remember as a medical student being taught that there is no toxic upper limit of morphine, that it's a natural substance and you can use. This is a medical professor that was teaching me that it was okay to go ahead and use morphine to upper limits. There are no upper limits because people tolerate them well. Well, sadly, we've got a lot of young, mostly young, but many dead people as a result of these sort of policies of you must treat the patient's pain to the optimum. And sadly, a lot of people start their narcotic addictions with doctor prescriptions. And so I believe state-based solutions are the right way to get into this. When you politicize healthcare, and in this case, healthcare was politicized, there are many examples of that, but this is a deadly example where the government, through JACO, was pushing a certain standard onto professionals that know how to take care of people. That's why we go through at least 7 years of training, if not more, for the things that we do. And I think the federal government ought to stay out of the business of dictating to professionals, and it's not just doctors, but also many other professionals, teachers, as well as engineers and scientists. The government does not need to be involved in telling them how to do their job. That's why they're professionals. They can do their job. So I believe state-based solutions are the right answers. Why? Because they're accountable and they are adaptable to the needs of the individuals. And that brings us to the county. I think many times the counties in the states, they have better solutions for these things, and they're not going to create unintended consequences, more problems with the solutions that they generate. So I believe there are many options, and local options are going to be better than distant options like federal government.
The follow-up to that would be that the funding side of this right now to try and treat the problem is crippling the counties.
That it is.
And so where do you find that solution?
Yes, it's a big problem, and I think many of us, your viewers as well as you and I, recognize that the federal government takes way too much of our money and gives it back to us with hooks and connections that we don't necessarily want. So my first thing is stop taxing us, and I'm proud of the president for having the tax cuts that he's put into place. What does tax cuts mean? It means more money in the pockets of the people, and that means more power in the pockets of the people so that they can move forward in the right direction with the things that they need to. So when it comes to funding, again, I want programs to be adaptable and local so the counties and the state can and do tax and implement their own programs. And I believe the state does have a responsibility and has carried forward with its responsibility to try to address this on multiple levels. In my 6 years as a legislator, I've seen multiple and voted on multiple options to try to work on this big issue.
Excellent. Well, that kind of sets us up for the next one, almost kind of answers it for us. We're scheduled along the Wasatch Front to have huge growth in the next 25 to 50 years. You know, there are a lot of people who look to the federal government as having a role in how we handle that. What's your answer?
Same thing. Stop taking our money, and then we can adapt our own solutions to this, and also let us use our land that is available so that we're not all compressed into a limited area. I think that's one of the issues that we struggle with in this state is that we estimate 66% of the state land is controlled by the federal government. As a result, we're constrained as to where we can go, not only for our houses, but also for our roads and other developments that we need. And so when it comes to that, I'd like multifaceted approaches, but particularly I'm focused on making sure that Utahns that know the land and love the land, that they're in control and in charge of those lands. And that's something that I would move forward with as a U.S. Senator.
So there is a movement to try and get the title released from the federal government to the state. There are lots of debates about whether that is right or wrong, but the more important one, is it achievable? Do you think it's achievable?
It's a great question, and pragmatism and reality is a component of this as well as fundamental principles. And I believe, so east of Colorado, they own most of their lands. West of Colorado, we are struggling because we're not allowed. So clearly there's kind of a double standard going on in the country. And what I take to that, and Chad, it's a great question, is there is a pragmatic aspect to this, is we all can estimate why things are what they are at this point. And the reality is we're a state of 3 million people. We have 4 federal representatives, 2 senators. Whereas you talk in the East Coast, they have far more of the federal delegation that serves. So my job as a U.S. Senator would be to convince and help others to understand why it's such an issue for us. So we need to own our lands so that we can use them. But also recognize that there's a certain ripeness with this in the courts as well as anybody that's a farmer or grows things. There's a time to pick that peach off the tree, and if you do it a week early, it's not good. And if you do it a week late, it's not good. So as to the ripeness of this issue, I believe it's ripening. I believe it's been ripening for a long time. But I think we're coming to a head on multiple levels, and that as I educate as a senator, my colleagues in the Senate as well as in the House, and as we continue with respect and diligence, apply for that right for us to use our lands that we can at least use, if not own, those lands. And so I'm happy to move forward in a pragmatic way on that issue. But I think understanding is really a big issue with the federal delegations throughout the country.
All right, great. We're going to take a real quick break here. We'll be right back with the county seat, talking to Dr. Mike Kennedy, who's running for the U.S. Senate on the Republican ticket. We'll be back with the county seat.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
If you're looking for gold at the end of the rainbow, you'll probably be disappointed, because in Piute County, the only thing you'll find at the end of a rainy day is the promise of adventure. Highway 89 is your access point through Marysville and the historic trails of Bouillon Canyon. Find yourself in the mountains one minute and the desert the next as you follow in the footsteps of the pioneers. Whitewater raft, fish, hike, all within a few minutes of a comfortable bed and a warm meal. Find out why the world has made Piute County its off-road destination. Piute County, the place where the rainbow ends.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
Look south to adventure. Look south to beauty. Look south to San Juan County. Out here, the road goes on forever, and what you'll find will change how you see the world. Climb on your OHV and discover forgotten landscapes and vistas that challenge the imagination. From Blanding and Monticello to the cliff faces of Monument Valley, we're open and ready for you to explore. San Juan County, Utah's Canyon Country.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking with Dr. Mike Kennedy, who is running for the Senate. We kind of covered this 30,000-foot level of the federal-state relationship, particularly as it relates to land, but in specific, that causes a lot of issues. One of them is wilderness study areas. We have now been 37 years with more acreage in this state under wilderness management as a study area than actual wilderness. And it's up to Congress to fix the problem. How do you move that issue forward?
Same thing as we've talked about is developing good relationships with colleagues in the Senate as well as in the House and with the President. And the reality is how long do you need to study these areas before you get enough data to do whatever you feel like you need to do? It does feel like in our state that a lot of these agencies and these dictations that we get from the federal government, it's almost like we serve the government instead of the government serving us. Well, the government is intended to serve us. It is a tool of the people, and the people are in control. And so as a U.S. Senator, that is a key role that I need to play, is to make sure that the government serves the people, and that includes the BLM, the Department of the Interior. We need to make sure that those individuals are not enforcing on our people things that are causing them to have constraints and trouble in their livelihoods and in their efforts to just live on the land. So the way we do that is by working with the senators and the representatives, developing relationships and making sure they understand how the government's working for us and sometimes how it's not working for us in the right ways.
Is that best done by standing ground or trying to, I mean, do you negotiate your way there? I'm sure that this is a large poker game back there.
It's a big issue, and in fact, it reminds me of a state legislative role that I've played in my community. So I represent a certain part of the state, North Utah County, and in that representation, there was an issue. It's just a road, so it's not as grand as some of the issues we confront on other levels, but in that road, it took me 4 years to negotiate with the various parties. There were multiple cities involved. There was state developmental center land. There was a neighborhood that was implicated in this. And what I like, Chad, is actually understanding, learning from other people, what are the issues on their side of things. And then as I understand, I start to navigate and help to negotiate with the other parties so that we all understand each other. And in fact, that road had been on the city's master plan for almost 40 years. And after 4 years of working with my local community, we were able to get the road in the ways that we wanted, in a way that I thought worked for all the parties. So when we talk about multiple parties, really it's a big part of that is understanding each other and being willing to develop relationships and work forward in a collaborative way to get things done in the way that we should for every party.
How much do you give to get that?
Yes, it's a great question, and in fact, most of these things do require a certain amount of give and take, and actually that's not unusual because in our relationships, personal relationships and workplace relationships, it's all the same thing. So for me, I'm invested in working forward in a positive direction, and there is a bit of give and take associated with that, and in this case, Utah has given a lot. It's about time we get to take some back.
Do you think we can put enough pressure on to make the horse issue in the West Deserts of Utah come to fruition faster?
I think so. It is so. When people think of the wild and free horse that is well fed and free to roam the vast amounts of land, that is not what we're seeing in some of these lands. These horses are starving and they are struggling and also, of course, competing with the livelihood of our decent people. And there is a place where there's a balance. It can work for all of us, but the reality is I think if we can bring people in and show them what's really happening instead of what they imagine in their minds is happening with the wild and free Mustang that's rearing back in a beautiful picture circumstance, and instead you show them the starving, struggling horses that are overpopulating this land that can't support them, then maybe they'd see a little bit different and move forward in a better way.
I can almost guarantee you that there is an advocacy group that if you show them that picture, they will refuse to believe it, and they'll tell you that you doctored the picture.
You're right.
I know this firsthand.
And it goes the other side around, doesn't it?
So how do we accelerate that? Because it needs to be accelerated. The BLM's making moves, but they're not able to make moves fast enough because Congress has put restrictions on what they can do.
Right, it's a very good point, Chad. And for me, I've thought over and over as to our lands and the horses and the roads is sometimes it's a matter of people need to actually come and see with their own eyes. And part of what I've thought about is how about we offer to our federal delegation throughout the country a touristy type trip. The Utah will pay for specifically for 2 days. You and a partner can come out and actually see for yourself what's going on with these lands. And I feel like seeing is believing. And in this case, I believe that there are ways that we can build relationships and bring people to these lands. It's not all Arches National Park, is it? And a lot of these horses are really struggling. And when people are able to actually see, then they start to believe.
Excellent. We'll take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to tackle law enforcement as a problem. All right, we'll be right back with the county seat.
Too often we find ourselves in shoes like these, or these. Wouldn't it be nice to change into something more like this, or this? How about these? Put on whatever shoes you prefer and come to Beaver County. We have exactly the adventure you need to put under them. So the next time you want to change out of these, come to Beaver County where you can jump into a pair of these. Beaver County, Utah. Lace up for adventure.
Planning your next conference or corporate event? The Davis Conference Center offers 70,000 square feet of flexible meeting and exhibit space, plus high-tech audio-visual services that will make your event a success. Whether you're planning a training, meeting, company retreat, wedding, or large convention, let the staff at the Davis Conference Center help you arrange your next event. Located east of I-15 in Layton, call 801-416-8888 or visit davisconferencecenter.com today.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
The Utah Farm Bureau began as a collection of farmers supporting each other to raise the food we enjoy. Today, Farm Bureau membership encompasses everyone, whether ranchers, growers, or just everyday folks like you and me. Members enjoy discounts on items like vehicles and ATVs, or insurance that's very affordable. You don't have to be a farmer to join, and dues are small, but together we make a big difference in keeping our food supply local and abundant. Join Utah Farm Bureau.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're talking to Dr. Mike Kennedy, who hopefully will be the next senator if his plans go correctly. We were talking about law enforcement. Currently, law enforcement agencies across the state are cannibalizing each other to try and get officers. And they are blaming pensions, they are blaming budgets, they're blaming everything. But the reality is there's a shortage of people willing to be engaged in law enforcement as a career. Part of this, in my opinion, is stemmed from the perceptions that have been created at a national level about law enforcement. What's your take on it?
I love the concept with law enforcement that they're peace officers, and I believe that we should look to these individuals more as peace officers. They actually promote something good rather than enforcing the law and punishing people, and I believe most of them are exactly that way, and I certainly appreciate my community law enforcement and our state law enforcement individuals. So as a U.S. Senator, I'd say first, the role of the federal government in that is limited to U.S. Marshals and FBI and CIA. There's a lot of law enforcement, but I'd want them not to have much of a role here in the state of Utah. When it comes to the competition, inter-county and interdepartmental competition, I'm glad that there is competition, and I hope that those salaries are going up so that we have more people going into it. But I agree with your general assessment is that with this overarching environment of police brutality and all police officers are bad people who are abusing the population, which is, I think, overstated and mischaracterized, although sadly there are examples where things have gone bad and really bad, and I'm sorry for those circumstances. But I'd also say that we can't send the message that all of these people, all of these good peace officers that we have in our community, that all of them are nefarious, that all of them have misguided intentions, because most of them are excellent servants of the people. So when it comes to that, I just want to reframe the conversation. Yeah, there's always misdeeds and individuals that have committed things that shouldn't have been done. That goes sadly for most professions, including doctors and teachers. We see examples in both circumstances where things weren't done correctly, but that doesn't mean that they're all bad, and we need to promote the fact that these are peace officers who are community members. They love their community, they want to serve their community, and I believe as we look to them in that way, that's going to help to increase the supply of those individuals.
So one of those areas that's unspoken of the competition is the fact that several federal agencies have developed their own law enforcement agencies. They don't have legal authority, so they duplicate it in the Federal Register as a part of their CFR, the code that they operate by, and they have created a dual law enforcement system, particularly in rural Utah, where if you get a traffic ticket from a county sheriff, you go to the justice court, which is nearby, you take care of it, it's done. If you get a traffic ticket by a federal agent, now you're going to St. George, as far as 5 hours away, to seek representation. That is an area where the federal government and the Senate can be involved. Do we need to rein in the ability and this license that's been taken for law enforcement?
Absolutely. So with these federal departments like the BLM having their own law enforcement I think it's entirely inappropriate, and that we ought to be using county sheriffs for the exact same purpose, is that the dynamic there of the federal government, the federal agency that is unaccountable to the people, and as a result will not change its approach. It's dictated or directed by Washington, D.C. instead of the local community, as the county sheriff is constrained by. That these are the militarizing and also the law enforcement operations associated with these departments and agencies. It is, again, there's been bad actions that have happened, and as the U.S. Senator, I'd want to make sure that we're reining that in. We should use local law enforcement that's accountable to the people, knows the people, loves and cares for the people, and is focused on peace officer service, not on law enforcement and controlling the population. So absolutely, and if that's through budgetary constraints and reducing budgets so that people that are hiring law enforcement in the agencies, they don't have as much money to hire these individuals, I'm certainly in favor of that.
Of course, that would then cut their ability to contract with local agencies to provide that service for them. So do you think, would you be willing to sponsor or actually to help craft something to bring that in?
Absolutely. So the money continues to flow so they can contract with the county sheriff and their department, and when necessary, they hire. And so the money flows, but it's not flowing into more officers for the BLM, for example.
This expansion has been kind of, as I understand it, been kind of interpreted from some very specific narrow parameters. So let's go back and just finish in this last minute that we have principle versus pragmatism. We have contrasting, we have two fine senators that are currently representing Utah. One of them's been a very pragmatic senator that says, I'll get what I can take and I'm willing to compromise a lot. Our other senator has been very principled in his approach and has sometimes held a line that has created a little bit of tension. Admiring the principle, it still creates a little bit of difficulty. Do you need to be more collaborative or do you need to be more principled? And how are you as a senator going to address that issue?
It's a great question, and the answer is yes. The reality is it depends on the issue, right? And between principles and no principles, there is a lot of room in between. For example, in this road that I worked on in my community, took 4 years and there was a lot of give and take associated with that. But how wide a road is, how fast the speed limit is, where it goes in this piece of land versus that piece of land, those are very pragmatic aspects. The principles are respect of the people, and in the case of the U.S. Senate, is power to the people and the state, not power to Washington, D.C. My principles are strong that way, and I see the power of the state government to do most of the things that need to be done. And I think our federal government has far overstepped its bounds. In addition, when it comes to principles of spending more money than you have, that's another fundamental principle that the federal government has failed us on, and we need to make sure that the federal government is living on a budget. Just like you and I live on a budget, the federal government should live on a budget. So those are fundamental principles, honesty and transparency. And as your servant, as the U.S. Senator that I intend to be, is I serve you. You don't serve me. And I want the regular voices, the regular people in the state of Utah to have a servant, somebody who knows them, that loves them and cares for them. That's my objective as the next U.S. Senator, and I'd love to earn their support.
Will you have enough, will you make enough time to actually talk to people?
Absolutely. To me, that's what it's all about. If I'm not visiting with people, I can't represent them. And so that's my focus, is real, regular people. And that's what I do as your U.S. Senator.
Excellent. Dr. Kennedy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chad. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in on the county seat. We'll continue this series with Mitt Romney at a point down the road, a couple of weeks. We'll see you next week on the county seat.